The deep black of space was quiet on the day the law was broken. The research ship Far Horizon moved slowly through the edge of the Kepler frontier, its lights blinking soft and steady, its engines humming low. The ship was small by Earth standards, only 120 m long, and it carried no real weapons. It was a science vessel made for mapping stars and studying gas clouds. No one on board expected trouble. No one on board even knew the galaxy was watching. Captain Daniel Brooks stood on the bridge with a cup of warm tea in his hand. He was a calm man, 42 years old, with short brown hair and steady eyes. He had served in the Earth fleet for 20 years, and most of those years had been quiet. He liked it that way. He liked maps and numbers and clean star charts. He did not like fighting, and he had never fired a weapon in anger. Beside him stood his first officer, Laura Bennett. She was younger, sharper, and quicker too. Smile. She often teased Daniel for being too serious, and he often teased her back for being too loud. They worked well together. Behind them at the comm station sat Owen Carter, a tall man with a quiet voice who liked old music and bad jokes. At the science station was Hedda Price, the youngest officer on the ship, only 24, with bright eyes and a notebook full of questions. The crew was finishing the third week of a long survey. They had mapped 6 new asteroids, found one strange ice moon, and recorded the signals of a faraway pulsar. It was good, slow, careful work. Daniel had just opened his mouth to ask Hannah about the latest scan when the ship shook hard. Cups fell. Lights flickered. A loud bang rang through the hole. Daniel grabbed the rail. "Report," he said. Hannah's hands flew across her screen. Her face turned white. "Sir, 3 ships just dropped out of jump space right next to us. Less than 1,000 kilometers off our port side. They are not Earth ships. They are not in our database at all." Laura leaned over her own screen. "Are they hailing us?" "No," Owen said. "No signal. Nothing." Then the second shot came. This one tore through the outer hull plating near the cargo bay. Alarm screamed. Red lights spun. The Far Horizon was being attacked, and no one had even said hello. Daniel set his cup down very carefully. His hand was shaking, but his voice was not. "All hands, battle stations. Owen, send a distress call on every channel. Hannah, get me a visual on those ships." The screen lit up and the bridge went silent. The ships outside were long and dark, with sharp curved hulls that looked like the claws of some giant cat. They had no markings the crew could read, and they moved with a hunger that even the youngest officer could feel. These were warships, and they were here to kill. "They are firing again," Hannah whispered. The Far Horizon shook a third time. Harder. Sparks flew from the ceiling. The lights died for a moment, then came back dim and red. Somewhere below decks, a man screamed, and then went quiet. Daniel knew the truth at once. His ship could not win this fight. His ship could not even run from this fight. The enemy was faster, stronger, and armed for war. All he could do now was protect his crew and warn his people. "Owen," he said, "is the distress call going out?" "Yes, sir, but I do not know if anyone is close enough to hear it." "Hannah," Daniel said, "I want you to launch a long-range data beacon. Pack everything we have. Scans, recordings, every second of this attack. Send it toward Earth and toward the nearest conquered listening post. Hannah blinked. Sir, the conquered. We have never even spoken to them. Today, Daniel said softly, they are going to hear from us. Hannah ran to the science console and began to work. Her fingers flew. Her eyes burned with tears she would not let fall. Outside the ship, the dark warships were closing in like wolves around a wounded deer. Laura turned to Daniel. Captain, they are not slowing down. They mean to board us. Daniel nodded. He had already known. He looked around his bridge at the faces of the people he had served with for 2 long years, and he made the kind of choice that captains have made since the first ship sailed any sea. He chose them. He chose to fight, not to win, because winning was not possible, but to give Hannah time. Laura, he said, take command of the boarding defense. Get the Marines, get the engineers, get anyone who can hold a rifle. I want you in the main corridor. Make them pay for every meter. Laura did not argue. She saluted, fast and sharp, and ran off the bridge. The next attack hit the engine room. The far horizon lost main power and began to drift. Gravity flickered. Stars spun outside the viewport. Hannah held onto her console with one hand and finished the beacon with the other. She uploaded the last of the sensor data, including the clearest image of the attacking ships, and she pushed the launch button. A small silver tube shot away from the dying ship. It vanished into the dark, carrying the truth of this day toward the stars. Then the boarding clamps hit. The sound was terrible. Metal on metal, screaming and tearing as the dark ships locked onto the far horizon's hull. Daniel could hear the cutting tools start to work. He could hear Laura's voice over the radio shouting orders. He could hear the first shots of the corridor fight, the sharp crack of human rifles and the deeper hum of alien weapons. Hannah looked up at him, pale and shaking. A piece of hot metal had cut her arm, and blood ran down her sleeve. The beacon is away, sir, she said. It is going to reach somebody. Good, Daniel said. He smiled at her, gentle and tired. You did well, Hannah. Now I want you to get to an escape pod. Right now. That is an order. She did not want to go. He could see it in her face. But she also knew that orders were orders and that her job was done. She gave him one last long look, the kind that says goodbye without using the word, and she ran. Daniel was alone on the bridge when the bridge door blew open. Smoke filled the room. Heavy boots pounded across the deck. Tall figures in dark armor came through. The smoke weapons raised voices, snarling in a language he had never heard before. He raised his hand slowly. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not run. He stood very still and waited. One of the figures came close and grabbed him by the shoulder. Daniel was dragged off his own bridge, with smoke in his lungs and blood on his uniform. The last thing he saw before the door closed behind him was the small image of his beacon still glowing on the broken screen, traveling faster than light toward home. Far away, on a quiet station orbiting in old gray world, a conquered listening post began to wake up. Lights that had not blinked in centuries blinked now. An alarm that had not rung in 10,000 years rang loud and clear. Somewhere in the heart of the galaxy, an ancient voice spoke a single trembling word. Impossible. But it was not impossible. It had just happened. The sacred law of first contact had been broken, and humanity, small and young and stubborn, had been the first to feel the wound. The conquered of stars had not held an emergency session in 800 years. The great chamber on the home world had grown quiet over time, used mostly for slow trade talks and long ceremonies. Its tall stone walls were dark with age, and the air inside always smelled faintly of old paper and cold rain. On the day the alarm rang, that quiet ended. Members of 17 species rushed into the chamber. Some came by foot. Some floated on small grav cushions. Some walked on 6 legs and some on none. They all sat in the great ring of seats that circled the speaking floor, and they all turned their many kinds of eyes toward the center. In the center stood the High Speaker. The High Speaker was an old crystalline being, tall and thin, with a body that looked like cut glass, full of soft, moving light. No one alive knew its true name. It had served the conquered for over 1,000 years, and it had never raised its voice. It did not raise its voice now. It only spoke, soft and slow, and the whole chamber listened. Brothers and sisters of the stars, the High Speaker said, the sacred law has been broken. A young species not yet contacted has been attacked without warning. We have proof. We will see it now. The lights dimmed. A wide screen filled the air above the floor. On it played the recording from the human beacon. The chamber saw the small far horizon, peaceful and unarmed. They saw the dark Vashari ships drop in. They saw the first shot. They heard the human captain's calm voice ordering his crew to fight, not because he could win, but because he had to. They watched the boarding. They watched the bridge fall. When the recording ended, the chamber was silent. Then from the back row came a sound no one had heard in living memory. The Iola delegate was weeping. The Iola were a soft people, gentle and slow, and their tears were not hidden. Soon other delegates were weeping too. The Visharu delegate, a tall warrior with golden fur and sharp teeth, stood up fast. His name was Lord Marek, and he was used to getting his way. This is a trick, he said loudly. The recording is faked. The humans attacked our ships first. We were only defending our space. The High Speaker turned its slow crystal head toward him. Lord Marek, it said, the recording shows your fleet jumping in. It shows your fleet firing first. It shows your fleet boarding. Do you wish me to play it again? Lord Marek said nothing. His tail twitched once. He sat down. On the other side of the chamber, a small gray delegate from a species called the Telmir raised one thin hand. Honored Speaker, he said, what will we do? The law is clear. The punishment is clear. But the humans are not here. They do not even know we exist. The High Speaker was quiet for a long moment. Light moved slowly inside its body. Then it said, they will know soon. The Visharu have prepared a second attack. We have intercepted their orders. The second wave is already moving toward the human home system. We will not arrive in time to stop it. Gasps filled the chamber. Lord Marek stood again, his face dark. This was not approved, he said. This is the work of rogue commanders. The Dominion will recall them at once. You will, the High Speaker said. But the ships will not turn back. We both know that. And so the conquered, the oldest and proudest body in the galaxy, sat in its ancient chamber and did the one thing it was very good at. It began to argue. Some wanted to send a fleet. Others said the law forbade it. Some wanted to warn Earth. Others said warning a young species was itself a crime. The hours passed. The argument grew louder. And while the conquered talked, the Vashari ships kept moving. Far away on a green and blue world called Earth, the human race was about to learn that it had enemies it had never met. The beacon Hannah Price had launched reached Earth 6 days after the attack. It arrived first at a deep space relay near Pluto. From there it was rushed to Mars and from Mars to a fleet station in low orbit above Earth. The man who watched the footage first was Admiral Frank Morgan. Frank was 61 years old, broad-shouldered, and slow to smile. He had spent his whole life preparing for a day most people said would never come. He had pushed the politicians to build more ships. He had been laughed at. He had been called paranoid. He had kept pushing anyway. Now he sat alone in a small dark room and watched the far horizon die. When the recording ended, he did not shout. He did not curse. He simply stood up, fixed his coat, and walked to the comms panel. He pressed one button. "Get me the president," he said, "and wake up every captain in the fleet. We are at war." President Corinne Holt was a tall woman, her 50s, with silver hair and a steady voice. She had been a teacher before she became a leader, and she still thought like one. She listened to Frank for 10 full minutes without saying a word. Then she nodded once and asked only one question. "How many ships do they have?" "Hundreds," Frank said. "Maybe thousands. We do not know yet. What I do know is that another wave is already coming." Corinne Holt was quiet for a long second. Then she stood up and walked to the window. The lights of the city below were soft and beautiful. Children were playing in a park 3 streets away. A bus rolled by. Normal life, kept moving while a storm came toward it. That night she spoke to the world. She did not give a long speech. She told her people the truth in plain words. Someone had attacked an Earthship without warning. Someone had killed Earth crew without reason. Someone was coming for the rest of them next. And then she said the line that would be quoted for the next 100 years. "We did not start this fight. We will finish it. We will not bow." While the world watched her speech, a small unmarked ship slipped into Earth orbit and asked very politely for permission to land. The ship belonged to the Iola. On board was a soft-spoken envoy called Brother Sale. He carried no weapons, only a small data crystal and a heavy heart. Frank met him at the landing pad. The old admiral and the gentle alien looked at each other for a long moment. Then Brother Sale bowed and said in careful, almost shy English, "I am very sorry. My people remember being small ones. We brought you something that may help." He gave Frank the crystal. Inside were star maps, jump routes, and the technical signatures of every Vishari warship. He could not give humans warships. The conquered forbade it. But this much, he said, the law allowed. Frank held the crystal in his hand for a moment. He looked up at the night sky, where the second wave was even now moving toward his home. Then he turned to his officers, and his voice was hard and quiet. "We have what we need," he said. "We always did." Around him, the fleet began to gather. The Visharu High Command was very sure of itself. In the great war room on their home planet, Goldenford officers stood around a wide table and watched a glowing map of the human system. They wore long red coats and proud smiles. They had read the reports from the first attack. The human ship had been weak. The human weapons had been crude. The fight, they said to each other, would be over in a day. Lord Marek himself stood at the head of the table. He had returned from the conquered chamber in a black mood, but the mood had passed quickly. The high speaker could speak it slow, soft words all it wanted. By the time the conquered agreed on a punishment, the Visharu fleet would already own the human system. The galaxy would protest, but the galaxy would also move on. That was how it always worked. Marek pointed at the map. The second wave will jump in here, at the outer edge of the asteroid belt. From there we sweep inward. We take the shipyards near the gas giant first. Then we move on the home world. The little blue planet will be ours within a week. His officers cheered. None of them noticed the small dot on the map far out beyond the belt that should not have been there. None of them asked what it was. They were too busy planning the victory parade. 3 weeks had passed since the attack. On the far horizon, 3 weeks was not a long time for the conquered who measured things in centuries. 3 weeks was not a long time for the Visharu who measured things in campaigns. But 3 weeks was an eternity for humans who knew how to work with their hands when their backs were against the wall. Admiral Frank Morgan had not slept more than 4 hours a night since the beacon arrived. He had moved his command post to a small station near Mars where he could see both Earth and the outer planets on the same screen. Around him, the human fleet was being born again. Old patrol ships were stripped of cargo and fitted with extra guns. New mines, thousands of them, were stuffed into asteroid shadows where no scanner could see. Drone factories on the moon ran day and night. Pilots who had retired 10 years ago were called back to active duty. Engineers worked until they fell asleep at their stations and then woke up and worked some more. The strangest worker of all was a man named Greg Holloway. Greg was a tall, thin engineer with messy red hair and a habit of talking to himself. He had been fired from 3 universities for refusing to follow rules, and he had been hired by the fleet for exactly the same reason. Frank had given him one order: build me something that can kill them. Greg had built drones. Not normal drones. Small, fast, hungry things that hunted in packs of 50 and shared a single mind across all of them. He called them his children, which made everyone uncomfortable, but no one told him to stop. The drones worked. That was all that mattered. Commander Laura Bennett was given the heavy carrier Resolute. She had recovered from the far horizon attack mostly. The scar on her left cheek would never go away, and she did not try to hide it. When she walked through the corridors of her new ship, the young crew looked at that scar and stood a little straighter. She had seen what these enemies could do. She had lost friends to them. She was not going to lose any more. On the day the Visharu second wave jumped in, the human fleet was waiting in a wide curve, hidden behind asteroids and dust. The Visharu ships came out of jump space, confident and loud, broadcasting in their own language, expecting nothing They found a wall of mines first. The mines did not look like much. They were the size of small refrigerators painted black to match the dark of space. But when the Vishali lead ships passed through the field, all of them woke up. At once, they did not explode in a normal way. Greg had designed them to throw out clouds of metal fragments at high speed. The fragments cut through Vishali shields like rain through paper. 3 Vishali cruisers were dead in the first 10 seconds of the battle before they had even finished arriving. Then the drones came. Greg's swarms poured out from behind a small ice moon, 50,000 of them moving as one. The Vishali guns were fast, but the drones were faster, and there were too many of them. Vishali pilots screamed in their own tongue as the small black hunters tore at their engines and their sensor arrays. Behind the drones came the Resolute, and behind the Resolute came the rest of the human fleet. Laura stood on her bridge and gave her orders in a steady voice. Forward batteries, fire at will. Squadron 3, swing left and cut their flank. I want their command ship trapped between us and the asteroid field. The Vishali command ship was a beautiful thing, long and golden with sharp curved fins that shone in the starlight. Its captain was a proud officer named Captain Thrain. He had fought in many wars and won them all. He had never fought humans before. He looked at his screens, at the wreckage of his lead ships, at the swarm of black drones eating his fleet, and for the first time in his career he felt something cold in his chest. "Pull back," he said. "All ships pull back to jump distance." But the humans would not let them go. Smaller Earth ships dove into the gaps and cut their drives. A young destroyer captain named Alice Foley saw a Vishali torpedo spread, heading for the Resolute. She did not hesitate. She put her own ship between the torpedoes and the carrier. Her ship died. She died with it. The Resolute lived. Laura saw it happen on her screen. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she opened them and gave the next order. The fight was not over. Far away on his Mars station, Frank watched the battle through 100 different feeds. Beside him stood a young analyst named Peter Lane. Peter was small and quiet and brilliant. With the data the Yola envoy had given them, Peter was reading every Vishari command transmission in real time. Before Captain Thrawn could finish an order, Peter knew it. Before the order reached the Vishari ships, Laura knew it too. "They are trying to jump out," Peter said. "They are charging their drives." "Tell Laura," Frank said. The human fleet moved to block. The Vishari command ship tried to break. Right. The human ships were already there. It tried to break left. They were already there too. Captain Thrawn realized, with a slow, sick feeling, that the humans were not just fighting. They were hunting. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 2-3 of the Vishari second wave was dead or wrecked. The rest fled back into jump space in broken pieces, leaving behind their wounded and their pride. Behind them at long range, a small group of human scout cruisers followed, silently, refusing to stop watching. On the Mars station, no one cheered. Frank sat down for the first time in 3 days. He looked at the screen for a long time. Then he said very softly, "They thought we were prey." Peter looked up at him. "And now?" "Now," Frank said, "they know what prey does when it has nothing left to lose." Light years away, in the Concord chamber, the high speaker watched the Same recording the humans had sent. Its crystal body glowed with a slow, strange light. When it was over, the high speaker spoke. One quiet line that would be repeated for 1,000 years. We were wrong about them. We were wrong about all of it. Victory did not feel like victory. After the great battle at the outer belt, the human fleet returned home to broken docks, full hospitals, and quiet funerals. Children waited for parents who would never come back. Old friends gathered at memorial walls and traced names with their fingers. Across Earth in the colonies, people lit candles in their windows for a week. Admiral Frank Morgan visited every wounded ship. He shook hands with every crew. He spoke to engineers covered in oil and to pilots with bandaged eyes. He thanked them. He did not say the war was over because he knew it was not. On the third day after the battle, Commander Laura Bennett walked into Frank's office without knocking. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She put a small data pad on his desk and said only one thing. Daniel is alive. Frank looked up slowly. You are sure? The Iowa intercepted a Vishari prison transmission, Laura said. He is on a station called Cordau, deep in their core systems. They are holding him with other prisoners, not just humans. There are people from at least 6 other species in there. Some of them have been there for years. Frank read the data. Then he read it again. His jaw set. The Vishari have been breaking the law for a long time. Yes, Laura said. And nobody knew. Or nobody wanted to know. Frank stood up and walked to his window. Below him, the lights of the new shipyards burned bright. New ships were being built every day. Now, the whole human industry had turned itself toward one purpose. He thought for a long minute. Then he turned back. We are going to get him, he said. And everyone else in that station. And we are going to bring back enough proof to bury the Vishari Dominion in their own laws. Laura smiled, slow and dangerous. I was hoping you would say that. The mission was not given a fancy name. Frank did not believe in fancy names. The plan was simple in shape and terrifying in detail. One small stealth frigate, the Whisper, would slip past the Vishari border. Defenses using jump corridors the Iola had quietly shared. Once inside, the Whisper would deliver a marine boarding company to Coral Station. They would take the station, free the prisoners, and run. The Whisper was captained by a quiet officer named Kevin Doyle. Kevin almost never spoke. He had been a submarine commander on Earth before he ever saw a star. He understood silence better than anyone in the fleet. His ship was painted a dull black and carried no markings at all. When the lights were off inside, no one would even know the Whisper existed. The Marines were led by Captain Olivia Webb. Olivia was short, broad, and frighteningly calm. She had been with the Earth Marines for 15 years and had never lost a soldier. She did not have to. Her boarding company was 40 strong. She picked every one of them herself. They jumped out of Sol space on a cold Tuesday morning. Laura watched the Whisper vanish from her bridge and held her breath for a long second. The trip into Vishari space took 5 days. 5 days of total silence, no radio, no signals, nothing but starlight through the viewports. On the 5th day, the Whisper drifted in toward Coral Station like a piece of dead rock. The Vishari did not see it. They were too busy watching for fleets Olivia and her Marines pushed off the Whisper in small armored pods. Each pod was no bigger than a closet, and each one carried 2 soldiers. They drifted toward the station in slow silence, painted to look like floating debris. When they hit the outer hole, small cutting torches fired up at once, and 40 Marines came through the walls of Corellia like a sudden cold wind. The fight inside was short and brutal. The Vishari guards on the station had grown lazy. They had never expected anyone to come. For these prisoners, they had certainly never expected humans. Olivia took the command deck in 11 minutes. She lost 2 soldiers doing it. She would carry those names for the rest of her life. She found Daniel Brooks in cell block 4. He was thinner than she remembered from his service photo, and he had a long scar across his forehead, but he was alive and he was on his feet. When the door opened and he saw the human flag on Olivia's shoulder, he did not cry. He just looked at her for a long moment and said in a voice rough from months of silence, "Took you long enough." Olivia laughed for the first time in weeks. They found 217 other prisoners on that station. Some were Yola, some were Telma, some were species the humans did not even have names for. All of them had been taken in illegal Vishari operations the Conquered had never been told about. The records stored in the station computers were even worse than the prisoners themselves. The Vishari had been breaking the sacred law for almost 60 years. Olivia took everything. The prisoners, the records, the dead guards, the security footage, all of it. The Whisper, low and quiet, slipped back out the way it had come. By the time the Vishari High Command realized Corellia had gone silent, the humans were 3 jumps away. 2 weeks later, the Conquered Chamber held the most serious tribunal in its history. The room was packed. Every species had sent its highest officials. Lord Marek sat in the Vishari delegation, with his head held high, expecting fines, expecting slow process, expecting the usual long bargain. Then the chamber doors opened and humanity walked in. President Karen Holt led the delegation. Behind her came Frank in his old gray uniform with no medals on it. Behind Frank came Laura, and behind Laura came Daniel, still thin but standing straight. They were sponsored by the Yola, by the Telmir, and by 3 other species who had lost their own people to the Vishari. They sat in the petitioner's seats, which had not been used in 1,000 years. Karen Holt did not give a long speech. She placed the prisoner records on the speaking table. She placed the security footage beside them. She placed the names of the dead, all the dead, on the table too. Then she looked at the high speaker and spoke in a steady, clear voice. "We are not asking for revenge," she said. "We are asking for the law to mean what it says. If the law means nothing, then your sacred law is only a word on a wall. We came here to find out what kind of galaxy we just joined." The high speaker watched her for a long moment. Light moved slow inside its crystal body. Then it turned to face the Vishari delegation. The ruling was final and complete. The Vishari Dominion was stripped of its council seat. Its military was placed under Conquered supervision. Its government was forced to pay reparations not only to humanity, but to every species harmed in the hidden operations. Lord Marek stood up at the end and tried to speak. The High Speaker did not let him. "You have spoken enough," the old, crystal voice said. "Sit down." And Lord Marek, the proud warrior who had laughed at humans only weeks before, sat down. Outside the chamber that night, Daniel found a quiet bench and sat alone for a long time. Laura came and sat next to him. They did not speak. They did not need to. Above them, the stars of an old galaxy turned, and for the first time in months the wind felt clean. 0.2 years passed. The galaxy moved on the way galaxies do. But it was not the same galaxy it had been before. Old trade routes shifted. Old friendships broke and new ones formed. Children on a dozen worlds grew up, hearing a new kind of story at bedtime. A story about a small ship called the Far Horizon and a quiet captain who refused to die afraid. On the conquered home world, the obsidian wall that held the sacred law of first contact was carefully recarved. The old text was kept, of course. The conquered did not erase its past. But beneath the ancient words in the script of every member species, a new line was added. It was a short line. It read simply, "This law was kept by those it was meant to protect." On the day the new line was finished, a small ceremony was held. It was not loud. The conquered did not do loud. The High Speaker stood beside the wall and spoke for only 1 minute. The crowd was small. Among them stood a young human girl, maybe 12 years old, with dark hair and curious eyes. Her name was Maya. She was Hannah Price's daughter. Hannah had survived the attack on the Far Horizon. The wounds she carried were not all on her skin. She did not speak much about that day, and she did not wear the honors the fleet had given her. But she had married a quiet biologist named Stephen Price 6 months after coming home, and Maya had been born a year later. Maya knew the story of her mother's ship, the way other children knew nursery rhymes. When the High Speaker finished, Maya eyed up to the wall and ran her small fingers across the new letters. She did not understand all the languages on the stone. She did not need to. She understood the human line. She smiled at it the way children smile at something they recognize, and then she walked back to her mother and held her hand. Humanity had been formally admitted to the conquered of stars 3 months earlier. The vote had not been a clean one. Several older species had spoken against admission. They argued that the humans were too young, too quick to fight, too willing to bend the old ways. Other species pointed out that those were exactly the things the conquered had needed for a long time. In the end, the humans were voted in by a margin of 3. President Corinne Holt had been offered the permanent council seat. She had refused. She said that humanity was new and that humanity did not yet know how to listen properly to a body older than its own history. Instead, she had nominated Brother Sale, the gentle Yola envoy, as humanity's first cultural liaison. The Yola people had wept openly when they heard. So had many humans. It was that kind of choice. The Vashari Dominion was a smaller place. Now, stripped of its seat, stripped of half its fleet, stripped of the pride that had carried it for centuries, it had begun to split. A reformist faction came forward, led by Captain Thren, the same officer who had commanded the second wave at the outer belt. Thren had survived the battle just barely. He had spent a year in a hospital bed and another year thinking very hard. When he was strong enough, he went to Earth himself. He stood in front of a memorial wall on Mars and read every human name on it out loud. It took him 3 hours. When he finished, he bowed to the ground and asked in careful and broken English for the chance to serve alongside the people his ships had tried to kill. The humans did not know what to do with him at first. In the end, Frank Morgan invited him to dinner. They ate quietly. They talked for a long time. The next month, a Vashari ship and an Earth ship began joint patrols of the Kepler frontier together. Not every Vashari accepted the new way. A small bitter faction retreated to the far edges of their territory and began to whisper. They believed the humans had been lucky. They believed the next war would be different. They began to build things they did not tell anyone about. Frank, now retired from active duty, warned the conquered more than once that the sacred law had been broken once and that anything that has been broken once can be broken again. The conquered slowly began to listen. Greg Holloway was given a research station of his own on the far edge of human space. It had no official name. The fleet called it Holloway's Place. He lived there with 3 assistants, a cat and a workshop full of strange devices. He built things no one asked him to explain. From time to time, he sent designs back to the fleet, and the fleet quietly added them to its arsenal. When asked what he was working on, he would only smile and say, just in case. Commander Laura Bennett was promoted to Admiral. She did not love the title. She kept the scar on her cheek in the same direct way of speaking in her. Crews loved her for it. She made it her personal mission to visit every memorial wall across the colonies at least once a year. She read the names. She did not skip any. Daniel Brooks retired from the fleet 6 months after his rescue. The Vashari prison had taken something out of him that he could not put back. He did not become bitter. He became quiet. He moved to a small academy on Mars, where new officers were trained, and he began to teach. His class was popular. Cadets came from all over for colonies to learn from the man who had stood on the bridge of the far horizon. They always asked him the same question. Sooner or later, what did it feel like, sir, when the ship was breached? He always answered honestly. He told them about the smoke and the noise. He told them about Hannah running for the pod and Laura holding the corridor. He told them about the strange clear moment when he had known he was going to be captured, and he had decided in that 1 second to put his hands up and walk out with his back straight. He never made it sound brave. He never made it sound easy. He told them the truth because the truth was the only thing worth teaching. On the last day of the school year, one of his cadets, a young woman from a colony world, asked him a different question. Sir, she said, do you think it could happen again? Another attack like that one? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He looked out the classroom window at the red Martian sky. Then he said, it will happen again. Maybe not in your life. Maybe not in mine. But the galaxy is very big, and not every part of it loves the law. Peace is a thing you guard, child. It is not a thing you assume. She nodded slowly. She wrote it down in her notebook. Far above the academy, on a quiet patrol orbit at the edge of human space, small unmarked ship watched the stars. Its crew was bored mostly. That was the goal. A bored patrol was a successful patrol. The captain, a young woman with steady hands, sipped warm coffee from a chipped cup and watched her screens. Somewhere out beyond her sensors, in a part of the galaxy no Earth ship had ever mapped, the bitter of Ashari faction was still building. Somewhere else, a new young species was making its first crude radio signals, not knowing yet that the galaxy was listening. Somewhere else still, the high speaker stood by the obsidian wall in the dark, alone, reading the new line again and again, and on a small blue and green planet that had once been thought of as prey, the lights of 100 cities glowed through the night, steady and warm and very much alive. The sacred law had been broken once. The sacred law had been kept by the very people it had been written for. And the galaxy, old and slow and stubborn, would never quite be the same again.